You probably earned minimum wage at some point in your life, right? It doesn't matter what that minimum wage was, but it probably didn't feel like enough compared to the cost of goods and services. On the flip side, you've likely heard about A-list celebrities or tech execs getting millions of dollars per year. If you felt like that was unfair, you aren't alone. An example of how vast the difference is, that Amazon in 2022 had a highest paid to average employee ratio of over 6,474 to 1. And the average S&P 500 CEO made 324 times what their average worker made. Can you imagine thinking you are worth over 324 times what the average employee makes? I mean, I'm pretty confident that I'm good at what I do, but I don't think I'm 324 times better than other people in the company I work for. Seems excessive. Thankfully, people in some countries are fighting to bring more equity to income. How nice would it be for maybe every $100 that an executive earned, you received a dollar increase in your salary? Let me know in the comments what you think a reasonable multiple would be between executive salaries and the average worker. Is it 10 to 1, 100 to 1, or do you think it should be 1 to 1? For the Amazon CEO, a 100 to 1 ratio would mean that for Andy Jassy to have a $212.7 million compensation package, it would require the average employee to earn over $2 million per year. Imagine what you could do with a $2 million a year salary. I don't think we will soon see a situation where the average employee in a large company is earning north of $1 million. So what could a more realistic example look like? The average Canadian family income in 1995 was $55,247, which would be around $99,000 when converted to today's dollars. This is a bit higher than the $92,764 average household income before taxes on the CMHC website. Sure, an extra $6,200 per year might help a fair bit, but would that even seem like enough in the current state of the world? Let's assume that one person is making $100,000 per year in the household, and the other people in the house don't work. Rare these days, I know. And then let's decide that $100,000 is the average wage of this special company we've created for this imaginary scenario. If we had a requirement to cap executive pay at 100 times the average worker, then the CEO of the company can't earn a compensation package of more than $10 million. It seems impossible that any CEO could survive off of $10 million of compensation a year. Assuming half of that is straight salary and a financial bonus, and the rest is split up between stock and benefits, you'd have around $5 million in salary to report to the government. If you were not to do any tax trickery, you'd end up with $2.3 million net per year. The average price of a home in Canada is a little over $600,000, so you could buy something twice that amount in your first year, which would leave you with $1.1 million remaining. A Tesla Model S with all the bells and whistles will set you back around another $150,000. So you buy that in your first year as well, why not? Leaving you with $950,000 remaining. You travel, pay your household expenses such as nice food, furnish that new house, a charger for your new car, and you probably still have over $500,000 remaining. I guess you then invest that in the market. And at an interest rate of around 6% conservatively, you'd make $30,000 a year in interest off that investment, which of course you reinvest for the next 20 years and end up with a future investment value of $1.6 million, as well as a paid off house, no other debts to speak of, all from 1 year of being a CEO earning just 100 times the average worker in this imaginary company. To find a CEO making only $10 million in pay, you'd have to go to the 377th CEO on the S&P 500 list of companies. I say pay in implied quotes because the lowest paid CEO on the list on AFL-CIO's website is Elon Musk for Tesla, where he earns $0 in pay. To further put that into perspective, if you were earning $20 per hour to earn $10 million, you would need to work for around 225 years. I don't know about you, but I'm not expecting to live for 225 years. Minimum wage in Canada varies from nearly $14 per hour to nearly $17 per hour today, a few dollars per hour short of my example above. Of course, this is a rough comparison with many flaws. There are taxes, non-salary compensation, and other systems in play that make this comparison incorrect. But I wanted to highlight how large the gap is, even at a 100 to 1 ratio, to further help you understand how massive a 300 or 6,000 to 1 pay gap would look like. There are so many people that are fighting to increase the minimum wage, and that's a great endeavor. But there are so many reasons why that can't be our only solution, especially when looking forward towards automation, AI, and rules regarding full-time employment versus part-time employment. So is the solution to put a cap on executive compensation? Well, I love the idea of tying executive compensation to the average worker in a company. My hope would be that it would entice some executives to raise the average so that their own compensation would increase. Greed can be a strong motivator, especially for executive-level capitalists. I think, though, that many people just assume the funds not being used for crazy amounts of executive compensation would just be given to staff. And while that seems like it would be a substantial pay increase to the common worker, let's take a second to break down what that might look like. You've probably heard an example like this somewhere. If I won $50 million in the lottery, I would give every Canadian $1,000. If you don't see anything wrong with the math in claims like that, I can appreciate why. Large numbers with many zeros can sometimes feel difficult to parse, but with a population of over 40 million people, having $50 million means you can give each person a little over $1. And that's often what happens when people think about trying to take savings from some executive salaries and distributing it among the rest of the workers. For example, Amazon has around 1.4 million workers as of June 2023, but I'm sure that number is likely lower today. That means if you took $140 million from executives' yearly compensation and put it towards employees, you'd only be handing a single $100 bill to each employee, or less than $10 extra per month. I'm sure you'd agree that it is better in the pockets of workers, but I don't know that it would really change much. So then, why cap the compensation of executives? Well, a big part of it is because it's the right thing to do for a more equitable society. Having executive pay be multiple hundreds or thousands of times higher than their workers is exploitation. Full stop. If more money was not directly distributed to its workers, could those funds be used to innovate in the company and take risks? Maybe that money could be safely set aside as a large reserve of cash so that during lean times, the number of workers that need to be let go could be zero. Or maybe it could be used to provide better resources for workers, more healthcare support for workers, or additional training opportunities. You might have noticed I've been saying compensation for executives. That's because they get salary, stock, and stock options, benefits, bonuses, and sometimes these non-salary related line items can be even larger than their salary. So if some kind of ratio cap is instituted, we have to be aware of the number of ways that executives are compensated so that we don't try to create a salary to salary comparison. Another example related to limiting compensation would be that if less stock was set aside or created for executives as part of their compensation package, the share prices would often be higher. One of the reasons being is that there would be less dilution of the stock. Again, another oversimplification, but there are potential positive outcomes of not trying to compensate executives so heavily in company stock. I see many discussions about needing to have higher executive salaries to entice the smartest executives to companies and how it needs to happen to be able to increase the wealth of the shareholders. This argument is so flawed and has nothing to do with capping the ratio of executive compensation to that of the average worker. If companies want to entice executives with high salaries, then they better pay their people well. I see discussions of not being able to provide performance bonuses to executives. And again, I say that there is nothing stopping bonuses, except an understanding that bonuses is part of compensation, and thus, if we had a 100-to-1 ratio, for every $100 of bonus you give to an executive, you need to find $1 for each employee. And since employees actually perform the labor, I'd argue that they're due some share. You are probably wondering if this has always been this way, but it hasn't. In 1965 in the USA, CEO to typical worker compensation was at a ratio of 21-to-1. It shot up to 61-to-1 in 1989 and has continued to grow wider from there. I'm sure devout capitalists are cringing at all of this. How dare anyone suggest that executives should be limited in what they can earn? But capitalism only works within boundaries, rules, and regulations. Unbridled capitalism is like the game Monopoly, and as the name suggests, there would only be one winner. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on capitalism, check out my video on what a post-capitalism world might be like.